Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Big Tobacco Taste Defeat. San Francisco ended the sales of flavored tobacco products and you can too. We're so excited that you're all able to join us today. I'm Pratima Musburger, and I'm a Senior Staff Attorney and Program Director at ChangeLab Solutions. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. I'd like to start out with just a few housekeeping announcements. For those interested in viewing this webinar at a later date, a PDF copy of the slides and a link to the archived webinar recording will be emailed to those who registered within the next week or so. Also, all participant lines have been muted. If you have a question for one of our presenters, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box on the lower left corner of the screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If we run out of time and haven't answered all of the questions that we receive, we will contact you via email with a response to your question. Today's webinar will consist of 4 presentations followed by Q&A. I would like to begin by briefly introducing our 4 presenters. We're so honored to have them with us today. Our first presenter will be Liz Hendricks, Program Consultant with the California Tobacco Control Program. Liz will be providing us with the historical context of flavored tobacco regulation. Our next presentation, focused on the health equity considerations of menthol and flavored tobacco products, will be led by Carol Magruder. Carol is the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, the project director for the newly formed African American Statewide Coordinating Center, and an inspired leader in the field of tobacco control. Our third presentation will be led by Derek Smith, Director of the San Francisco Tobacco Free Project. Derek will be discussing San Francisco's initial flavor ban and the landscape leading up to the recent June 5th referendum. Our final presenter will be Derek Carr, Staff Attorney at ChangeLab Solutions. Derek will be sharing how California communities can build on the existing momentum for flavors policy. After the 4 presentations, we will have time for a brief Q&A, and I will be serving as moderator. Before we get started with the presentations, just a quick disclaimer. The information provided in this webinar is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. ChangeLab Solutions does not enter into attorney-client relationships. So with that, I would like to once again thank all our presenters for their participation in today's webinar and for sharing their extensive expertise with us. I would like to now turn it over to our first presenter, Liz Hendricks.
Thanks, Pratima. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Hendricks. I'm a program consultant at the California Department of Public Health Tobacco Control Program. And today, my portion of this presentation is just going to go over the past history of flavored tobacco policies in the U.S. And I'm going to just try to set up a historical context for our other speakers who will then go more into detail about the actual San Francisco flavored tobacco policy. All right, so when we're talking about flavored tobacco policy work around, in the United States, we need to go all the way back to 2009. And in 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Federal Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, which is a really long name, so from here on out I'm just going to refer to it as the Tobacco Control Act. And this law banned the manufacture of flavored cigarettes in the United States. The logic behind this law was that flavored cigarettes appeal to youth and young adults, and so the law was intended to protect them. So these flavors are very appealing to young people, and so the law was hopefully set to protect them. However, there are a few huge exemptions in this law. The first exemption is for menthol cigarettes. Menthol was not included as a flavor, and the law does not extend to non-cigarette products. So e-cigarettes, Juul, cigars, and smokeless tobacco products are not included. So after the Tobacco Control Act was passed, many cities in California and then across the country adopted policies to try to close these loopholes in the Tobacco Control Act. So many of these policies restrict the sale of flavored tobacco products to some extent, and many also include menthol cigarettes. In the same year as, if you're looking at my timeline, in the same year as the Tobacco Control Act went into effect in 2009, New York City also passed an ordinance that restricted the sale of all other tobacco products, so tobacco products other than cigarettes, with the exception that these products could be sold in tobacco bars. And then a year later in 2010, Santa Clara County, which is here in California, adopted an ordinance that also restricted the sale of flavored tobacco products. 2 years later, Providence, Rhode Island passed an almost identical policy to New York City's flavored tobacco, OTP, other tobacco product ban. And then a year later in 2013, Chicago also passed a law that prohibited the sale of tobacco products within 500 feet of schools. But unlike these other policies, it also included menthol cigarettes in its flavored language. And since then, there are 17 other jurisdictions in California that have adopted varying policies that in some way restrict the sale of flavored tobacco products and menthol cigarettes. And there are also other policies throughout the country, but there are 18 in California, which is a really big deal for one state. And as I said, these are all of varying degrees. So some include menthol, some don't. Some restrict flavored tobacco products within a certain distance of schools. But there are two policies in California, Yolo County and San Francisco, which I'll get into more detail in a few minutes, that completely ban the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes. And actually, there is likely to soon be a third jurisdiction in California. San Mateo County just recently had a similar policy to San Francisco's that just passed its first reading this month. So I put these policies on a map. Each star on this map is a different policy around flavored tobacco products. And you can see that the majority of these policies are in the Bay Area. And then there are also a couple of policies in Los Angeles County. So what's not shown on the map are the many jurisdictions in California that are currently working towards adopting a policy and are in different stages of that policy process. So some jurisdictions are just in the very beginning phases of doing community education, whereas others actually have their ordinance on the agendas of their local board of super or city council members. And I know this presentation is restricted to policies in the U.S. and mainly California, but I do want to make a note that there are many other countries actually that restrict the sale of menthol cigarettes or flavored tobacco products to some extent. So like Brazil, Ethiopia, Uganda, Turkey, and Moldova are just a few of those. And actually, Canada has a law now that took effect last year that prohibits the use of menthol in all cigarettes, in blunt wraps, and cigars. So these policies, back to the U.S., these policies have not gone out without their legal challenges. After the laws the policies were passed in New York City, Providence, and Chicago, tobacco companies filed lawsuits against each of these ordinances, arguing that the Tobacco Control Act preempts localities from passing their own laws regulating flavored tobacco products. And preemption in this case just means that if a state or a local law, so these three local laws, conflicts with a federal law, the Tobacco Control Act, that federal law trumps that lower level law. But in each of these cases, the courts upheld the law, finding that the Tobacco Control Act does not preempt each ordinance because the ordinances regulate the sale of tobacco products and not the manufacture of those products. And this is really important. These are three examples of cases that reaffirm the authority of state and local governments to not only enact laws that regulate the sale of tobacco products, but also to adopt restrictions that are more stringent than federal law. So since this webinar is about San Francisco's flavored tobacco policy, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of this policy before turning it over to other speakers who are going to go more into detail on this policy. So quick background, when the city of San Francisco adopted its comprehensive flavored tobacco policy, which I mentioned earlier, the tobacco industry and its supporters took a different approach than the past lawsuits to try and stop the law from going into effect. So after the San Francisco Board of Supervisors adopted the policy in 2017, R.J. Reynolds paid signature gatherers to collect enough San Francisco resident signatures to try to put that policy on the June 2018 ballot for a vote, which was a stall tactic and to try to let the voters decide whether or not they wanted this policy to go into effect. Enough signatures were collected and were verified, and then the policy was stalled and just until this month. And I'm sure that most of you who are on this call know the outcome of this, but if you don't, spoiler alert, San Francisco voters voted to uphold San Francisco's ordinance 68 to 32 in favor of keeping the law and banning flavored tobacco products and menthol cigarettes throughout the entire city and county of San Francisco. And this is unprecedented. This win sets the stage for more flavored tobacco policies to be passed across California. And this is a really, really big deal. So I'm going to now turn it over to Carol Magruder, who's going to give more specifics on this policy and then also discuss the health equity considerations surrounding the policy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for helping to ground everyone in the historical context of flavored tobacco regulation, Liz. So our next presenter is Carol Magruder, who will be speaking about the health equity considerations of menthol and flavored tobacco products.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. I want to just give a shout out quickly before I begin to Change Lab, because as we know, we cannot operate any place in the world without attorneys, and even though they don't give us legal advice, they have been in the background of all of the regulations and ordinances that we've had. They have been a partner with us and a partner with the different municipalities, steering them in the right direction of what to consider as they go forward in protecting their communities. So I am Carol Magruder, and I'm the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, AATCLC, and our website is savingblacklives.org. And we're 10 years old this year. We were saving Black lives before Black Lives Matter. We were born before they were. And this is a picture of our group. We were formed in 2008 to educate our community and others about, the deadly effects of tobacco, and that tobacco kills 45,000 black folks every year in this country. This is our group. We're all over the state, and we have started with basically no funding and have hung together these 10 years. All of our people, almost all of our original people, are still there. And the three main people who have been working all over the country on this are myself, Dr. Philip Gardner, and Dr. Valerie Yerger. We're known as the Three Musketeers of Tobacco Control, and we're so busy now we have to split up and do different things. But we have been the ones who traveled all over doing what we can to get menthol and other flavored tobacco out of our communities. So this, I went over, but that picture that we've seen there, so that's Malia Cohen, who introduced this legislation. We call her Black Girl Magic, and in the middle there is our Mayor Ed Lee, who passed away, and this is one of the last pieces of legislation that he signed. I am from San Francisco, even though I don't live there anymore, but my office is there, and I still consider myself, I grew up in Baby Hunters Point, which came in handy for many of the conversations that we had in order to enact and to keep this legislation. So as Liz already mentioned, our President Barack Obama signed this Tobacco Control Act in 2009, and it took out all of the flavors except for menthol. And at that time, we were just forming, and we're kind of thrown into the national fight about this because, we took particular umbrage to it because these flavors were taken out to protect children. It was meant to protect children, but it did not protect our black children. And so we began this fight that we've been on for these past, since 2009. And so these are some of the children who are not protected, and these are my Head Start babies, babies in Head Start who are low income by definition. That's how they participate in Head Start. And those are the children who are not protected by this and who grow up to be the Marie Evans of the world. And so we call this trickle-down public health policy, and we talk about in our presentations the similarity oftentimes with public health policy and the criminal justice system, and that we're the patient on one and we're the defendant on the other. And there are a lot of folks who are buzzing about, and we're not a part of that conversation and a part of the solution. And so with this instance, with menthol, we have been very much a part of the solution and what's been going forward. And so as Liz mentioned, these other products were not regulated by the FDA, so the emerging tobacco products, the Swisher Sweets, and these are the products that are smoked by young black and Latino men. They're prominently featured in the hip-hop videos that spread out to everyone else. And for some reason, the FDA did not see fit to include these in their original, or not the FDA, but President Barack Obama and all the folks who signed the Tobacco Control Act did not see fit to include these products in that original legislation. And now we are here 10 years out, And it takes a long time for a deeming rule to be issued, comment to be made, and in the interim, these products are still in our communities and proliferating. So Swisher Sweets, this is one of my favorite advertisements of the soft porn practically for, and this is what's enticing our young people to smoke these products that have all the flavors still, including menthol. So we have been on this mission since that happened. This was an abstract that we submitted to Singapore, actually at the World Conference of Tobacco Health, an abstract a poster session that we had, just documenting how African Americans have been initially targeted, the urban programs that, that co-opted our leadership, our media, and that over 80% of African Americans smoke mentholated cigarettes and 90% of our youth initiate. And that addiction is about science and opportunity. It's not about there's a particular race that's more susceptible to become addicts. There are social issues that make us more susceptible. And that menthol for us is a human rights and a social injustice issue. And that's what we have been talking about these past almost 10 years. So this is our inner city youth. This could be that Head Start baby that you saw, Marie Evans. She's our poster girl for menthol. Grew up in Boston public housing, was given free Newports at the age of 9, addicted at 13, dead at 54. And her family is one of the few African-American families that sued, and they actually were awarded a $152 million judgment, and they actually received $79 million. So that's the evidence that was submitted in Boston of the targeting of the African-American community. And when we approach this, that's how we approach it from that angle. This is a research article written by Dr. Valerie Yerger and Ruth Malone out at UCSF, and just documenting the racialized geography and the corporate activity. And the information that's presented in this research article is gathered from the tobacco industry documents, their own documents that have been housed at UCSF and that were collected through litigation, through discovery. So we're able to actually look at what they're saying and how they're studying us, how they're profiling us, and how they're strategizing to keep us as their customers. So these inner cities are the battlefields for the menthol wars, we call them, where these companies competed with each other for the black market. And as I stated before, chemistry plus access equals addiction. And so what we're doing, this is about cutting off the access to our communities and to others, to all children, including African American and the children who live in the inner cities with them. So we frame this as a social injustice issue. This is an ad from our CTCP years ago, Dying for a Menthol, and African Americans in the box. And this predates much of what we're seeing, but laid the groundwork for what we're seeing right now. So healthy communities facilitate an individual's ability to make healthy choices. That's our premise, and that's what we're working for. And so we've been working all this time just to engage affected communities. And the interesting thing about San Francisco is that San Francisco really has such a small African-American population, down to perhaps 4%. And my family is a perfect example of that. There are only 2 of us out of all the first cousins who still live in the city. So in spite of that, there was a lot of energy. And over all these years, since most of us are based in the Bay Area, we have been engaging our community literally for decades now. But this piece of it now that got this legislation passed and held it at the ballot box consisted of really engaging the community through community forums and education, spoken word events, actually giving voice to the community after we educate them about what's been happening, getting resolutions. And Malia Cohen, she actually submitted a resolution when she first came on as a supervisor asking the FDA to take menthol off the market, and then we realized that nothing was going to happen on that level, and that's when local municipalities begin to enact legislations on their own. So true, meaningful engagement, and then honesty about what's going on, because the tobacco industry comes in and they're framing this as the opposite, that we're targeting our community, and that's where the health equity and that lens comes in, that we are doing something against our community, trying to take menthol off the market, and we're all lawless, and we'll go down as smugglers and involved with the police, et cetera. So I'm getting ahead of myself. But in the interim, we began collecting resolutions and educating our community. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority was the first national organization to sign a resolution. And initially we were thinking the FDA was going to do something, so we were asking the FDA to take menthol off the market. So when we could see that wasn't going to happen, we pivoted and began after Chicago came online and enacted the first law that prohibited menthol, we quickly, and they litigated it, we quickly began working with other municipalities to have menthol included in the flavor restrictions that we were trying to do. So the Bay Area Black Nurses, and so this is about building that base in the community. And when the industry came in, really we were protected because we had done the pre-work. This is a national resolution from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and this was ratified. So this is a national resolution that authorizes all local branches of the NAACP to get involved in these local fights. And this is important, as I said, in really having the community to be inoculated. So when this ordinance was passed, Let's Be Real San Francisco, which was almost wholly funded by R.J. Reynolds, formed. They blocked us, and I believe Derek is going to talk about this. But I just want to, Let's Be Real, which is really an African-American slang vernacular, keeping it real, let's be real, and them using that as a title for their campaign and what these unspoken things say to folks about let's be real. And so part of the campaign, Let's Be Real, was talking about all of the social issues that are happening in San Francisco. And since we're the national capital for car break-ins, and I personally have had my car broken into 3 times in San Francisco, or the windows broken. So I was actually able, as a victim of that, to say that in spite of these things, we still need to protect our community and our children from the tobacco industry, and that people have to legislate and work for their community simultaneously on these issues. So some of the things that Reynolds American, and this predates, this happened in Oakland, this forum that the Reynolds American, which is Newport, sponsored, saying how we were criminalizing our community. This was a forum in Oakland in October of 2016, and we all went to this forum. And so they were just talking about the possibilities of what could happen if we take menthol off the market, what's going to happen in our community in terms of the black market and smuggling and officer-involved shootings and brutality. These are some of the men who participated in these forums. And this is Al Sharpton actually at a church in Oakland talking that he was neutral, but he wanted people to talk about it. And we agree that people do need to talk about it, but they need to talk about it not at the behest and the sponsorship of Reynolds American Tobacco and Newport Cigarettes. So this is the uncle of Oscar Grant, who was killed by BART police in Oakland, and he was really expressing his displeasure because folks had no idea they were talking about menthol cigarettes when they called these forums. And this is an example of how the industry attempts to use our community as the linchpin to block public policy. So they successfully done that in our communities, but they also attempt to do it for others. So this man is the vice president of Reynolds. His name is J. Bryce O'Brien, and he was there that day in the church. So it was just so interesting for us that these white corporate moguls come in to observe African Americans, to plant these seeds of dissension amongst us, and then come in to observe as they attempt to keep their turf, their folks that they have manipulated all of these years. They don't want our communities to get away. And so it was just really interesting to see this man sitting in the back of this church in person, watching what he was creating and attempting to keep. So they attempt to link on to legitimate concerns of our community. And so as we've all been seeing the social media with the racism and police brutality and officer-involved killings, so to link that to what we're trying to do to protect our communities is just very interesting. And how they have a front group there because they can't actually come out themselves and say that Black Lives Matter, but they are there trying to manipulate our legitimate concerns. And so this is a picture of Eric Gardner. Most of you have seen parts of these videos, I Can't Breathe. And he was choked to death in New York in 2014. And so what we do and when you have legitimate representatives from the community is that you have to address these issues head on. I can't go to my community and talk about these issues with not addressing these other issues that we have that are so pressing and putting them into perspective for the community and helping people to see who is the predator, who is killing our people. And while we must deal with the officer-involved killings and the police brutality, we also have to deal with the biggest super predator of them all, which is the tobacco industry. And when I actually this morning looked at this video again for the first time, the full of it, that day he wasn't selling loose cigarettes. He had tried to break up a fight, and so he was just jumped, and they because he had such a record, they put that out that he was selling loose cigarettes. But on this day, I don't believe that he was, and that this was just police brutality that got out of control, and then they were able to pull up his past misdeeds and to say that that was why they had attacked him. And here are some other pictures, Trayvon, Oscar Grant, Jordan out of Dallas. And so these are part of my presentations that I do all over the country to really help folks understand that these are the predators in our community and that they cannot come in and undermine good public health policy for our people. That when we pass a law, say for instance, to wear seatbelts, so we don't pass a public policy and make a law about seatbelts and then tell black people, oh, you all can wear a seatbelt if you feel like it, if you want to. So when we take out the flavors, we need to take out all the flavors, and that's why this is a social justice issue. This is simply the slide from Judge Gladys Kessler, where she talks about how she deemed them to be guilty of federal racketeering. And so we need to always remember that they are, the tobacco industry, they are federally adjudicated racketeers. And I liken it to them to the Godfather. They're trying to keep their turf. This isn't about our community. This is about them keeping their turf. And so I just want to talk about SF Ken out of UCSF. They, prior to us, this is how we helped to introduce this legislation, was we were able to be funded to go out into our community, such as it is in San Francisco, and really get ahead of this and educate people about what was coming. And we had all hands on deck. Michael Bloomberg, of course, who put in, the lion's share of the money, Tobacco Free Kids, the Heart Association, Lung Association, Cancer Society, Breathe California, Truth Initiative, and then our team headed up by Larry Tramotola. So once, we've been doing all of this work for all of these years, when we got to the hard part, everyone was there really making sure that San Franciscan voters were educated and they knew what was going on with the industry and this pushback. We also had our Chief of Police, William Bill Scott, and Oakland. So there was a regional synergy and assistance and support for each other as Oakland enacted a similar legislation but kept it to adult-only stores. And these are just some of the pictures. So this is Dr. Jonathan Butler, who was representing UCSF and the NAACP. And this is what tobacco control looks like. This is a project that was funded years ago in San Francisco, a community action model with young African Americans in the Western Edition, talking about beaties. Their research actually led to national legislation to restrict the sale, to regulate beaties in the United States. So this is what we've been working with, this little trickle down, and now we really have a powerful public health policy tsunami for good. We're very proud to be a part of this effort. This is myself, Dr. Phil Gartner, and Valerie Yerger, and we are available after we've got a few things we're handling here in California right now, but we are available to help other municipalities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your powerful presentation and for sharing your extensive expertise with us, Carol. Our next presenter is Derek Smith, Director of the San Francisco Tobacco Free Project. Derek will be discussing San Francisco's initial flavor ban and the landscape leading up to the recent June 5th referendum.
Good morning. I am so honored to follow the words of someone who's been a mentor to a lot of us, Carol Magruder, and really appreciative of all the people. Carol mentioned a lot of them that have been involved in our local effort to make things right around flavored tobacco. Folks who have been really looking and seeing the world and our community as it is and as it really can be, and actively working to change it. I would just say I'm going to talk in a moment about what the ordinance actually is and a little bit about the process. I learn a lot every time I interact with Carol, actually, just seeing her presentation on the work that happened, kind of a lot of background work, a lot of connecting work. all of us, I would say, have been very much conditioned to think it's okay for people to light up and inhale tobacco. I think all the time about how strange it would be someone from, I guess it'd have to be another planet, because all of us on Earth are so used to seeing tobacco products that the tobacco industry has moved further and further, saying that people are choosing these products, that there's an adult choice, that it's somehow acceptable that the tobacco industry, it's just increasing its market share. So it's okay the way they target African American, Native American, LGBT, low income, military, people living with mental illness, that's all acceptable to us. And I would say that we have to kind of open up our eyes. This issue of flavoring the poison, adding flavors to something that is the number one cause of death and disability in our country and more so around the world, we really need to step up, especially as it's targeting our kids and getting them hooked on a product for life. It's conditioning that's happened to all of us, and our eyes are open right now. I hope yours are, and I hope you'll think about how you can be a part of this effort to move forward and make things right and save a whole lot of lives in the process. I just want to overview first what are the products. These are really simplified versions. When we talk about flavored tobacco, sometimes it gets confusing to people and they're asking what is or isn't included. In San Francisco, our local ordinances imply all of these products: cigarettes, including menthol cigarettes, cigars, cigarillos or little cigars, blunt wraps, electronic cigarettes, smokeless tobacco or chew, which isn't used very much in San Francisco, not even sold in all our stores, vape pens and mods, e-liquids, as well as hookah products, the actual tobacco product in a hookah. For us, because of our local ordinance, this is what tobacco looks like. In the state of California, there's a definition, and I think it's actually quite similar at this point, that includes all these products. So it's really important to wrap your head around what all is included. And I know I've learned a lot through the years from Carol and other advocates about being inclusive of products. It's a very easy thing. Actually, I'll just say a state legislator called me from another state right after our passage of this and said, we're going to move forward on e-cigarettes. We want to do e-cigarettes for sure. And my response had to be, why not include menthol cigarettes? Why not include all these products? Is it really sufficient? Are you really protecting everyone by pushing on e-cigarettes? And they said, it's easier. We see a route. We see a path. And really, we have to keep encouraging people to think much bigger so we're fully inclusive of the public health community. If you're not familiar with these products and you're working in tobacco control, you're doing something wrong. And I know it's hard because like Juul is not included, the image up here, and I know a lot of people who work with young people are familiar with that. These products, you need to discover them, and our leaders need to discover them. These products are targeted toward young people, and because we are not young people, we don't know what they look like, and we don't receive the targeting the way young people do. So it really behooves us to all take our leaders, take our community members, take our health department directors into a vape shop. Go hang out and check it out. It's a public space. Look around. Ask them to show you the craziest colors and flavors and products. Look at the packaging. And make sure your elected officials, all your leaders, don't just think they know about these products, but they receive a basket full of these candy-flavored poisons. We've done that in San Francisco just to make sure we're educating. It's well within our right to educate and inform people about what products are out there, since they're not spending a lot of time in local stores and they're not the targets of these products. So you're going to see the same pictures over and over again because we're proud of movement going forward in San Francisco, and when President Obama kind of kicked things off, but especially kicked off the discussion because Congress wasn't inclusive. This is a very large picture overview of some of the items that happened, as Carol mentioned, and Liz as well, the 2009 law that did not include menthol, like specifically excluded menthol. If you can go back in the Wayback Machine and think about what was happening at the time, in the mid-2000s, the tobacco industry was really launching more flavored products. They had cherry, vanilla, other flavored cigarettes. It's kind of crazy. Like the new generation right now, I've talked to young people, they never knew that happened. That was their targeting to connect with new young people. And Congress said, that's crazy. We can't have flavored cigarettes. They moved something forward, but the tobacco industry was so strong and they so needed all those menthol smokers that they fought tooth and nail to make sure that menthol tobacco continued. So there was a wrong that we had to right. All of us have to keep working to correct, and we can't rely on some sort of federal correction to this. We've got to do it locally, and we have the authority to do it. In 2011, San Francisco, our Health Commission adopted a resolution on encouraging the FDA to act on this, particularly related to menthol. And then, as Carol said, in 2016, UCSF and our local tobacco-free coalition started kind of convening on this and saying, okay, we're going to tackle flavors. We got to do this right now. In 2017, we actually were able to fund some community-based organizations using our community action model. It's like a community assessment process, and to point them toward flavored tobacco and ask them to kind of dig around in their community, do some surveys, start talking to experts, get youth involved, and figure out what exactly could be done. How can we move forward on this issue? In 2017, really starting in February, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council and our coalition, our amazing strong co-chairs and community members, really started to shop this around a lot more with leaders. And through the process, a lot of you might be familiar with kind of legislative processes that take a while. From March through May 2017 were a variety of public hearings. Supervisor Cohen really served as a superstar in stepping up on this matter. I'll just say a little something about her. I know Carol mentioned her as well. I think she had no idea, as no leader could know as they're stepping into greatness, quite how big things can get, quite how impactful things can get. And I think it was probably overwhelming because she would get all this negative, response from around the country and everything. However, she embraced that greatness, and she actually even ran on it. She ran for a state board afterward, text board, and in her ads she mentioned specifically fighting big tobacco and big soda, and she won. She won that position. So just to say, politically, people who take big risks and make big changes, it can really pay off for them. Our shopping around went to the Small Business Commission, the Health Commission, the Youth Commission, and as well as the Board of Supervisors and Public Safety. And all of these got kind of some discussion of this issue and some further feedback about it. In June, the ordinance was adopted by the board unanimously. All 11 of our elected officials saw the benefit of this, saw young people, African Americans, saw our large coalition of people concerned about the health and well-being of the next generation. And as Carol said, our mayor signed it shortly after in July. Instantly, R.J. Reynolds tackled this with this very quick referendum signature campaign. They paid a lot of money to get signatures collected with the idea that they could kind of hammer down this and make a lesson out of San Francisco for other jurisdictions. In September, the ordinance was suspended. It wouldn't take effect in April of this last year as it was supposed to because it had to go to voter referendum. I made a little error here that the tobacco industry actually, to date, what we know is that R.J. Reynolds specifically spent about $11.6 million on this, and so that the numbers are wrong here. But just to say, we just elected a new mayor, London Breed, who will be taking office, and altogether the amount of money she had was something like $1.7 million to run, and she won the office. So she had something like $14 per vote she received, and now she's the mayor of San Francisco. Congratulations. R.J. Reynolds spent a total of $11.6 million, and they spent $152 in our local election for every vote they got. So someone became the mayor of San Francisco for less than $15 of fundraising per vote, and R.J. Reynolds still lost this campaign they fed with 10 times as much money, $152 spent for every single San Francisco voter. What this means, and it's really hard for me to explain to you, and I wish I had a visual of this, but the flyers that came in the mail, the advertisements that were on the radio, the television, anyone in the Bay Area saw it because we're all in the same media. But there was a flood, an absolute flood of advertising and a lot of infiltration, a lot of efforts that Carol pointed to. That said, some of these sound negative or maybe scary in some way. The voters got it, and even with a David versus Goliath, tiny amount of money supporting public health, on June 5th, to over 2/3 of our local people saw right through the smoke screen and still supported this public health protection. And I suspect that's what would happen in a lot of communities now because people really care about our kids. Like, people really care once you point out the information. Just to give the basic facts here, what this does is modifies our local tobacco license, and it prohibits the sale or distribution of any flavored tobacco product. The enforcement only occurs at the retail sale level, so it's not about individuals possessing or having tobacco on their person. Carol pointed to that as kind of an argument or concern that people say, somehow this is going to shake down young men of color or young people, but in fact this only takes place, the only way this can take place is at the retailer level. Basically, retailers cannot have flavored products on the shelf. They can't sell them. If someone goes in and inspects and finds they're there, they have to be removed. This ordinance takes effect 10 days after the election is certified, and we think that's going to be in July 2018. This is very fresh news, and thanks to Change Labs and all the presenters for pulling this together so quickly, because this law is not completely enacted yet. Nothing can hopefully get in the way at this point. However, the law, we don't even have an effective date necessarily. It will be soon. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about so many people who did this work. You see them in these pictures that Carol mentioned before. Of course, Carol's in the picture. But our health department director, Tomas, is right above the sign that says flavored poison. Dr. Aragon is the director, the health officer for the city of San Francisco. Our coalition is all on the left, the Tobacco Free Coalition, these elected officials who so bravely stood up right away and said, this is not right. We have an opportunity to change this, to do something, to really serve the community. And of course, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Coalition. We really engaged University of California as well, and I would encourage anyone to talk to your researchers and talk to your public health professionals and your doctors and providers. And of course, on the left, a lot of these coalition members we have a lot of youth serving agencies that really got behind this, in a major way. Breathe California was the agency that really took on the bulk of this political campaign and did an exceptional job. You see my colleague Allie in the middle of the left picture. That's the basket full of stuff, because most people, eventually I had to go and collect it from the supervisor's office because it smelled so funky. They were like, we are so tired of smelling that crazy cherry product. Just to conclude, I just want to say that what we're doing next is really trying to engage smokers. We have a different situation in front of us, because smoking is very much habitual, it's very much continued. There's not a lot that interrupts it. So there's actually a real opportunity for those of us who care about people who smoke and really want them to continue with us, who've lost too many loved ones. This is a great opportunity where something's going to change, and people who smoke flavored products are no longer going to have such easy access to them. That gives us an opportunity to reach out to them and say, I know this is difficult for you. How are we going to make this better? You've mentioned before you want to quit. How do we do this? So we'll be offering expanded quitting services, and also we have quit kits that we send to folks through the mail. We want to do some public education, make sure parents know what's going on, make sure that everyone is aware of the new law and the harms of flavored tobacco. And then we'll be doing education and enforcement. The details are kind of still to be decided. We want to follow the lead of our colleagues in Contra Costa County and Oakland in engaging our community partners, these groups that are listed here, to really help us do the outreach and support the rollout, to make sure that retailers specifically and store owners know that community members support this, and they want to make sure it's enacted in a good way, in a way that protects all of our kids. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Derek. Next up, we have Derek Carr from Change Lab Solutions. Derek will be speaking about how communities can build on the momentum created by San Francisco's flavor ban.
Thank you for the introduction, Pratima, and thank you to all of our other speakers today for sharing your important perspective. So Liz, Derek, and Carol have covered a lot of ground on the policy landscape of flavored tobacco control policies generally, San Francisco's policy specifically, and the public health and equity considerations that are really the driving force behind this focus on menthol and other flavored tobacco products. I want to spend the next several minutes talking about more of the kind of nuts and bolts of flavored policies and the different options available to communities, because it's really important that we build on this momentum and build on this win by pursuing and passing these policies in even more communities. And there are a number of different decisions for communities to make when considering the policies, like the scope of the sales restrictions, the products covered, and grandfathering of existing retailers. I'll also introduce change lab solutions model ordinance that communities can take and adapt to meet their own needs. So there are three main types of policies that we see to restrict or prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products. And I do want to note that when I am using the short-term flavored tobacco products, I am intending to include menthol cigarettes in that. So the first is the San Francisco model, a complete prohibition, which, as its name implies, means that no retailer in the jurisdiction can sell any flavored tobacco product. And this is a more comprehensive approach, and it is the approach that's likely to provide the greatest and most immediate public health benefits. And while this is the approach that we recommend wherever it's possible, we also do recognize that it may not be politically feasible in all communities. So there are these other policy options as well. One of those other policy options are buffer zones, which means prohibiting flavored tobacco sales within certain distances of use-sensitive areas like schools, playgrounds, and parks. So, for example, you could prohibit flavored tobacco sales within 1,000 feet of any school. Although I do want to note that's still pretty close. It's still only about a 5-minute walk. And buffer zones have become pretty popular options. As some of our earlier speakers noted, cities like Berkeley and Chicago have adopted them. But they also face some significant implementation and enforcement challenges. For example, before a community can implement a buffer zone, they have to do all sorts of mapping studies, really robust education for tobacco retailers and the general public to understand whether they are in buffer zones or not. And retailers often perceive buffer zones as being arbitrary and unfair, since by their inherent nature, it means that situations will come up where a retailer on one side of the street can sell flavored products, but a retailer on the other side of that same street can't. And the third policy option is to limit flavored tobacco sales to certain tobacco retailers who primarily sell tobacco products and do not allow anyone to enter the store if they're under the minimum legal sales age and not accompanied by a parent or legal guardian. These policies often include additional requirements, such as like the store not selling food or alcohol for consumption on the premises. And this policy is probably a little bit easier to implement and enforce than buffer zones, but it will still provide a lesser public health protection than a complete sales prohibition. And Oakland's policy, which will go into effect next month, is a good example of this approach. Another decision point is what products your ordinance will cover. As Derek mentioned earlier, San Francisco took a really comprehensive approach and included all tobacco products, cigarettes, smokeless, electronic devices, hookah, just to name a few. And this really aligns with our recommendations and best practices. And taking a comprehensive approach to including all tobacco products is important for a variety of reasons. For one, as has already been noted, all of these products appeal to youth, and they all serve as starter products that make it easier to initiate tobacco use. And it's also important to remember that failing to include products could also result in product substitution. So, for example, after the federal law banned flavored cigarettes other than menthol cigarettes, tobacco companies started making cigarette-like flavored little cigars. So people who were smoking the now banned flavored cigarettes could simply switch to these similar products. And so it's important that we include all of them so that sort of product switching doesn't occur. And I also want to highlight that policy can include flavored component parts and accessories. So these are things like flavored wrapping papers and blunt wraps, and including these products will prevent retailers from circumventing the flavor restrictions by selling a secondary item that imparts a characterizing flavor on otherwise unflavored tobacco. And finally, of course, there's always the big question of menthol cigarettes, and I won't repeat what Carol, Liz, and Derek have already covered. They said it all much more eloquently than I ever could. But I do want to reiterate that despite tobacco industry talking points to the contrary, we do not have to and we should not wait for the FDA to take action on menthol cigarettes. Local communities can and should address the public health, equity, and social justice consequences of menthol cigarettes by ensuring that they're included in any flavored tobacco policy pursued. And we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to do an abbreviated version of the grandfathering. But this is also a place where retailers tend to push back against policy proposals. So grandfathering refers to the exempting of some or all existing businesses from complying with a new legal requirement. In the flavored context, this would mean allowing tobacco retailers who sold flavored tobacco products before the restrictions were enacted to be allowed to continue selling those products moving forward. And there are a lot of nitty-gritty legal details around grandfathering that I'm not going to bore you all with today. But the big takeaway that I want you all to walk away with is that grandfathering is not a binary choice. And by that I mean we don't have to choose between grandfathering existing retailers forever or not grandfathering them at all. There's just a middle ground between those two extremes where you can provide retailers some flexibility but also maximize the public health benefits. And so, for example, you can provide a 6-month grace period after a flavored tobacco policy is passed in order for the stores to have time to sell down their remaining inventory. And I do want to highlight that from a public health perspective, grandfathering should never be permanent and it should never be transferable. If a tobacco retailer sells their business to another person, the new owner should be required to comply with the flavored tobacco sales restrictions. I want to turn to briefly discussing Change Lab Solutions' Model California Ordinance restricting sales of menthol cigarettes and other flavored tobacco products. This model is available on Change Lab Solutions' website and the link that is on this slide. And I'll also note that we're in the process of revising our tobacco retail licensing model ordinance, which will incorporate similar prohibitions on the sale of these products. So the key provisions in the model ordinance, what are they? First, it applies to all tobacco products, including non-menthol flavored cigarettes, menthol cigarettes, cigars, little cigars, and flavored components, parts, and accessories. It applies to all flavors, including menthol. So if a product contains tobacco or nicotine, or is an electronic smoking device and it has a characterizing flavor other than tobacco, it's prohibited from being sold. Next, it applies to all tobacco retailers without exception. So this is a complete prohibition, not a buffer zone or an adult-only tobacco store approach. It provides a 6-month grace period between when the ordinance is adopted and when tobacco retailers have to stop selling their products. So this allows retailers to sell off any inventory that they have, for local government to plan for implementation and enforcement, and for time to educate retailers and the general public about the new restrictions. And the model also includes an additional optional provision that will provide some significant tobacco retailers a little bit of extra time. And as with all Change Lab model ordinances, you can take this and you can modify it to meet the individual needs and circumstances in your community. And Change Lab and the other technical assistance providers in California are available to help you in that process. We can provide you and your communities with technical assistance as you're working on these policies. And I also want to reiterate before I conclude Derek's point of that these policies, including our model ordinance, it's important, especially from an equity perspective, that they only penalize retailers who sell flavored tobacco products. They do not regulate, restrict, or in any way penalize individuals who possess or use flavored tobacco products. So it is strictly a sales prohibition that will be enforced against the retailers, not individuals. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Pratima for questions and answers.
So thanks so much, Derek, and thanks again to all of today's presenters. It looks like we have about 7 minutes left for Q&A, and several wonderful questions have already come through, so thanks to our webinar participants who have shared a bunch of great questions. As I mentioned earlier, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible, and if we run out of time, we will be sure to respond to your questions via email. Our first question is directed to the California Tobacco Control Program, and in addition to Liz Hendricks from CTCP, we also have Rich Kwong, Chief of the Strategic Planning and Policy Unit with us for our Q&A. So our first question is for Rich. What guidance or recommendations would you provide to communities interested in pursuing flavor policies?
Hi, Pratima. Thanks for having me on this important and celebratory webinar. And I do have a couple pieces of recommendations for communities working on flavors. But before I get into those, I just want to take a moment to really appreciate the overwhelming passage of Prop E by San Francisco voters. It sent yet another strong mandate for California to end the tobacco epidemic in our lifetime. And this outcome really bolsters California's 2016 momentum of landmark victories, where similar to Prop E in San Francisco, 2 out of 3 California voters voted yes on Prop 56 to increase the tobacco tax and send revenues toward tobacco prevention. And of course, the passage of the 5 other major state tobacco laws that gave California a major boost towards ending the epidemic. But what else is really overwhelming is the evidence that tobacco companies sell their products in kid-friendly flavors to lure young people and other tobacco-related priority populations into a lifetime of addiction to dangerous products, and it really does not get any more sinister than that. As Liz mentioned, to the 18 cities and counties that have passed flavored tobacco policies, your diligent persistence to educate local community members and policymakers of this problem has paid off in a big way to protect the health of your communities. So onto the guidance I do want to provide, a couple pieces. I'd like to offer the other partner communities working on flavored tobacco policies. I'm really excited to tell you that Prop E's overwhelming victory, despite a highly focused and funded tobacco industry opposition that Derek Smith described, provides all of you with a really significantly clear pathway toward ending flavored tobacco product sales in your communities. This is in addition to a really great resource available on CTCP's and partners' websites, which is a white paper by the California Attorney General's Office called Focus on Flavors that really lays out the legal pathway and justification for state and local governments to restrict or prohibit tobacco product sales. So many local projects, local lead agencies, and community-based organizations, including the newly awarded regional priority population grantees, they stretch from northern to southern California, as well as Central Valley, and include urban and rural counties. Prop E provides you with a really clear green light so you can now go and move forward with your work. And all of you collectively working towards flavored tobacco policies at the same time, up and down our state, will really thwart and dilute the tobacco industry's efforts to defeat good public health policies. Secondly, we recommend utilizing the flavored tobacco education resources available on partners to support your work. It's a plethora of things such as fact sheets, infographics, white papers including the Attorney General's, Change Lab's model flavored tobacco policy ordinance that Derek Carr just discussed, model resolutions for both urban and rural counties developed by UC Hastings, and a list of the 18 jurisdictions with flavored policies. And then finally, Pratima, as most of you know, the California Department of Public Health launched in April a statewide flavored tobacco media campaign in 7 languages. It's on TV, radio. I see it every day myself driving home on bus stops, but digital, out of home, cinema, social media, and the landing page, flavorhookkids.org. We're really pleased to see that over 650,000 people have gone to the website in just 7 weeks, which is huge and an all-time high. And over 3,500 letters of concern to mayors were generated. So to all of you working on flavor policies, we strongly encourage you to utilize these materials in your presentations, and if it is in your plans and budgets, you can request to place these ads locally. So please check with your program consultant on placing media. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rich. Our next question is for Carol. Carol, in your work with the African American community, did you encounter resistance from community leaders who are themselves smokers? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Hi. I would say that the leaders who are smokers are of a certain age, and so they've already started to feel some of these health effects. So that wasn't so much of a problem as is leaders who take money from the tobacco industry for support for their organizations. And it shows itself basically in silence, where they're not really doing anything about these issues. So we challenge our leaders to make tobacco control in the top 5 priorities for African American communities, and that they should be having active plans about what they're doing about the biggest killer of black people. And we are taking that to the people, so that rather than us running around chasing leaders, that it's their own constituents who are asking them, what is their plan to deal with this issue, this epidemic in our community?
Thank you so much, Carol. And it looks like, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We've received a lot of wonderful questions from participants. So as I said earlier, we will be responding to your questions via email. I wanted to, again, thank all of our presenters and all the webinar attendees for tuning in. And lastly, just a quick note that we will be sending out the webinar link as well as the PowerPoint slides to all who registered within about a week. Thank you all for your participation. Have a wonderful day.